who are real estate attorneys, this topic is one you probably know very well. Those of you who aren't, hopefully you can learn something today and maybe even have a little fun. We'll find out. So yes, my name is Alison Gaskin. I am a transactional real estate attorney at Chaves Perlowitz Luftig. We are primarily a real estate law firm located in FiDi, all the way downtown. Real estate is what I do, and it's all I've done. I have been practicing since 2014, which actually, if I can go back to the slide. Yeah. So I've been practicing since 2014 solely in real estate law. Prior to being admitted, I interned at a real estate law firm. And I worked for a solo female attorney who I worked for years, ended up becoming an associate and then eventually managing attorney until I left and came where I am about 3.5 years ago. Now I manage a team. I manage the transactional residential team here at the firm. There's 6 real estate lawyers. We have a team of paralegals, legal assistants as well. And I kind of just threw out, I know it's a little salesy, but it's true. I mean, the reason why this topic's important is because it has actual real value, right? There's actual real dollars on the table that we can save our clients. And I just did some fast math when I was preparing this. It's probably well over $1 million, but I didn't want to seem too salesy. But yeah, I've done so many CEMAs, and I have saved clients real money, up to at least $1 million through this mechanism. I teach a lot. I speak and teach very frequently. I do a lot of CEs. Obviously, I generate a lot of, we generate a lot of our business through referrals from real estate agents. So we do often have speaking engagements, either myself or other attorneys at my firm. And we do speak on all assortment of topics, but definitely on purchase CEMAs. So happy to speak to my legal colleagues here today. I've really find that when people ask questions, or even the other real estate attorneys, if you want to chime in with your own stories, right, your own hero stories, it really makes the class a lot more engaging, interesting for all of us. And you can hear, it's a break from just hearing me drown on and on. So please feel free, very much encouraged. So purchase CEMA, well, it's an acronym. It is a consolidation, extension, modification agreement, right? That's where the CEMA stands for. Now, we do them in refis oops, I think I just made it small again. Oops. We do them in refis all of the time. Well, when the world still did refis. So in a refinance, right, if you have a loan on the property and now you're refinancing to pay off your loan and pay it off by taking out a new loan, we do what's called a CEMA, right? You basically take your existing principal on your current loan, and it's applied to your new loan with either the same lender or the new lender. And the mechanism on this is that you will not have to pay mortgage recording tax on the amount of your existing principal. Basically, the thought is they're not going to make you pay tax on money that's already been taxed when you first took out the loan. In refinances, we don't even think about this. It's just what's always done. As soon as a borrower submits an application for a refinance, the bank attorney contacts the payoff bank, right, whether it's the same bank or different, to order what we call the collateral, right? We want to order the documents so we can do the CEMA, and the borrowers will not pay tax on the existing principal. But in a purchase transaction, it's a little different. We don't have the same borrower, right? We have the seller who's a borrower with their bank, and then we have the buyer who will be a borrower with their new bank. And in this scenario, the buyer essentially takes over the seller's mortgage principal and consolidates with their mortgage. That's kind of the simplest way to explain it, and how I'll explain it to buyers. They're not assuming the loan. We want to be very careful. We're not using the word assumption. It's very different. Believe me, we'd have very happy buyers right now who could assume mortgages from 2021, right? When we were having sub 3% interest rates. That's not the case. Assumptions rarely happen. Let's see. And basically what will happen is that they will, with the purchase CEMA, it's kind of the same kind of concept. You will apply to the payoff bank. You'll send a bunch of documents over. You'll sign some documents, and you can assign it over to the new bank. Why do it? It's money, right? It's going to result in significant savings, hopefully. Not always, which we'll get into, but hopefully it will result in some big savings on the mortgage tax, and then some smaller savings on the New York State transfer tax. But what is it? Well, I don't want to kick a dead horse, but again, it's a consolidation extension modification agreement. It only applies to 1 to 3 family homes or condos. I say in New York only, and I've actually been told that's not true. There are some other states that do allow it, but New York has such a high mortgage recording tax that it's higher. It's much more frequently done here, and it does not come. There's many states that don't offer it or that don't even have a mortgage tax at all. But it'll only apply to real property. It will not apply. Why do I keep losing the Zoom screen? Sorry, guys. I think. Sorry about that. Okay. Basically, it only will apply to homes or condos and not to co-ops because there is no mortgage recording tax on co-ops. When people are house hunting, a big thing they will look at, right, are closing costs. I mean, sure, you have oh, my video's off. Sure, you have sheer numbers alone where there's just more co-ops here in the city, but also the closing costs on a co-op are significantly lower than a condo. And the mortgage recording tax is the big difference here. So on a co-op, you generally have closing costs, even with a loan of 10 grand and below. With a condo, we'll see an example where it could be very much higher. Now, if it's over $1 million, of course, you have a mansion tax. So assuming it's under $1 million, that's kind of where you're looking at for co-op closing costs. For real property, it's going to be much, much higher. So for there to even be a mortgage tax, there has to be a mortgage. There is no mortgages on a co-op, right? With a co-op, we're not dealing with real property. It's a stock certificate and a proprietary lease. So a lot of times people use the verbiage very loosely. They'll say, I have a mortgage. Well, if actually you have a co-op, you technically don't have a mortgage at all, right? There's a note and a security agreement, and the lender files a UCC agreement against a lien against the apartment, right? And that's what we call the equivalent of a mortgage, even though it's not technically a mortgage. So no mortgage tax on co-ops. So throw it off the table with co-ops. It's only going to be with real property, which is condos and houses themselves. Okay. So first thing you have to check is, does seller actually have a mortgage? It doesn't matter if the borrower is borrowing $10 million. If the seller doesn't have a mortgage, it's not viable. There has to be existing debt for a CEMA to be successful. Okay, and there's a few ways you can check. I mean, ACRIS, that's also an acronym. That is a free public resource, and anyone can go online and check. You can you could just plop in either a property address, a county block and lot, or their actual name, and you can see all the publicly recorded documents against it for the most part. We're talking mortgages, deeds, common charge liens, tax liens, all of these things that are recorded against a property. Now, once you get into like the outer boroughs, like Staten Island, some properties in the Bronx, their online records on ACRIS aren't always as great. So another thing you could do is always reach out to title company, right? You can reach out to judicial and ask them to run a quick search for you if you want to do it before you even enter the contract. Although I'd say most people probably wait till the contract's signed before they're doing that. So you can go online, right? We go on ACRIS, and we can see if the seller has a mortgage. They'll be publicly recorded. When you see a mortgage, you can see, one, when they took it out and how much did they take it out for. If they took out a mortgage 20 years ago, there's probably not that much principal remaining on it. Versus if they took one out a few years ago, then we can discern if it's a hot property to do a mortgage on. No, Anya, a cooperative apartment is not considered a one-family home. A cooperative apartment is basically you get a stock certificate, which you buy into the co-op corporation, and then a proprietary lease, which allows you to live there. You're not actually buying real property with a co-op. So if there's no CEMAs that apply or no mortgage tax at all that will apply. Yeah, you're welcome, no problem. So now if I've identified from ACRIS alone that a CEMA could be viable, right? I can see that seller has a mortgage in the last few years. I don't see a satisfaction. That's great. Then Now I'll reach out to the seller's attorney and say, hey, can I see your client's recent loan statement? Because it doesn't matter what the loan was taken out for. It matters what it is now. We want to know what they currently owe left, how much debt is left on the property, so then we can crunch numbers and see if a CEMA is going to make sense. Okay, you'll hear me say this a few times, but I can't tell you how often I am the first person in this process to mention the word CEMA to my clients. I have pitched many a client and beaten out many an attorney who, other clients, they may have vet an attorney that's less money than me, or they're just vetting a bunch of attorneys. And oftentimes I will be able to retain a client because I've now discussed a CEMA with them and will live on the phone with them, talk about a CEMA. If CEMA with the same lender, are there any loan origination fee savings from lender? I don't think so. I don't know. I don't know that, but I don't think there are any savings. I think you do have origination fees. If any of you, yeah, I don't think so. I think if you look on the CD for it, on the closing disclosure, there'll be loan origination fees, even if you're doing a CEMA. Alison asks, nice name, what is the minimum amount of existing mortgage needed to make the CEMA cost worth it? Honestly, it really, really depends. I'll go through a cost benefit analysis in a few slides. You'll see. I've had clients want to go for it when they're only going to save $500, right? If it's not going to delay the closing, it's going to save any amount of dollars. It might be worth it for them. But we'll go through some scenarios. Okay. But again, I think that it's important I even think I put this exact line later on in the slideshow. You identify viability during due diligence, and then you add it to the contract. When I'm speaking to agents, like real estate agents on CE classes, I'm constantly telling them a value add this could be brought up if they brought it up earlier on. But oftentimes that is not the case. You go next. Okay, so we'll do some real world here. What is the benefit of a purchase CEMA? Well, without it, buyers who take out a loan on New York City real property must pay a mortgage recording tax. If the loan is over $500,000, it's 1.925%. That's almost 2% of the actual loan amount. If it's under $500,000, it's 1.8%. Now, once you get out of New York City into Long Island or Westchester or any of the other counties, you can do analysis on it. It's usually not worth it in many cases. For example, I live in Nassau County, and when I bought my home, I didn't do a CEMA. The seller had a loan. Even though they had a loan, it just didn't make sense for the time it would have added. So I ended up skipping it. But when you get up to like higher loan numbers, maybe it makes sense to do one. So, but definitely New York City, it's usually going to be something worth exploring if they have it. So we do a CEMA, we can not only reduce that tax liability, but maybe even altogether reduce it, right? Because there's a scenario where maybe the seller owes more than the buyer's even borrowing. So in a scenario like that, the buyer could potentially be paying $0 of mortgage tax. Okay, closing costs in general in New York are so high, especially as you get here in the city. So for example, let's see. I chose this one not because the purchase price is so much, but because it's one I recently did. Just kind of a real world example where obviously I've taken out their private information. But here I had a client who was buying a condo, $4.25 million condo here in Manhattan. And this was a closing cost estimate that I prepared for her when she first signed the contract. So first we have our purchase price, less her, I use the word down payment, but it's really contract deposit, if we're being correct here. She had a $425,000 deposit. The market standard here in New York is 10% down. She was financing $3,187,500, and that was her balance after closing, right? At closing, this is the cash she would need to come up just to pay the seller back. Okay. Well, I will pause just to see the questions. Wouldn't a $500 savings be offset completely or more by the extra legal fees? I meant she was netting $500. Like we calculated what her legal fees would have been. Absolutely. That would not have made sense with legal fees. So that was like what she netted. And we went for it and we did it. It is more attorney work for sure. What's your thoughts on sellers asking for the piece of the benefit of purchasers received? Well, I'll go. I have we'll discuss different schematics of how it can be done, but I'll tell you, when I'm seller's attorney, I'm asking for it every time. If it's not negotiated as part of the offer and it is just money on the table, that's something I'm asking for as a seller, at least half of it. As a buyer, I'm also asking for it, right? And usually in the first round, we ask for all of it. And then a reasonable attorney, which I am, knows that giving up half is what's is what's pretty much fair at that point. I'm curious why you're not a big fan of it, but yeah, if you want to chime in, if you want to make a comment of why you're not a big fan. Unless, I mean, if it's pre-negotiated, I'm not here to get in the way of what brokers have already negotiated as in terms of the offer, right? But if it's just on the table and I'm the first person discovering the possibility of a CEMA and discussing it, then we're going to ask for it. Legal fee, we all have different legal fees, so we'll keep that different there. But yeah, here are just some closing costs you'll see for a condo. You have their title policy, it's fee insurance, pretty much required. The, you have the lender's policy, right? Because she has a loan, the lender also gets title insurance. You have that fun mortgage tax right there. That's a third item, fourth item down. Over $61,000 of mortgage tax she'll be paying. The only thing that's higher on this is her fund mansion tax, because my client is going to own a 5-bedroom mansion now, of course. Almost $64,000. Then we have some estimates of like what title searches may be, a title closer fee, a move-in fee, various board fees she owed with her application. Now, we don't really know the lender fees and prepaids. We just estimate at this time. It's really going to depend what their interest rate is, right? Their per diem interest that they're going to have, bank attorney fees, appraisal, origination. We tell them they're going to pay homeowners insurance for 1 year at closing, especially if you're financing. Your bank will always make you pay the first year up front and then usual escrow for a few months. And that's the lender escrow. Common charges, she's always going to pay 1 month at closing, some escrow fee. So all in all, her closing costs we're estimating is a bunch of about $153,000. This is not including her lawyer fees. It's not including bank attorney fees, origination fees, insurance, none of it. So, these are closing costs. And sometimes buyers just are not that informed until they get something like this really of what your closing costs are going to be. So, with this scenario, we were able to take her mortgage tax and reduce it by just over 50%. Right, her mortgage, she ended up owing $28,000 of mortgage tax at closing. I mention this because my client had never heard of the word CEMA before I discussed it with her. And in fact, she was really confused. And I'll tell you, this wasn't a very nice client. She wasn't a really very pleasant person, and she had never heard of it before. But she was a lot nicer once I told her I found her $30,000. She became much nicer to me after that. And what's even more crazy is the seller's attorney didn't ask for a cent of it. This wasn't negotiated as part of the deal. The seller did not come to me, and when I asked for the full CEMA, when I put in the contract saying seller would cooperate with the CEMA, and if viable, buyer would pay all expenses and get all benefits, seller didn't comment on it. So my client scooped up all of that money and the seller did not. And, I bet you the seller didn't even know what was happening, right? We don't really know what kind of communication was being done. But yeah, so buyer got the full benefit of it on that scenario. Um, so that's just kind of a scenario, just a little one-over scenario. How many hours of extra legal work dealing with the CEMA? Well, it kind of depends. I mean, I've definitely had some that don't take that much extra time at all, but I've definitely had scenarios where we are trying to track down missing notes, allonges. We have to go back, we have to review all the assignment docs when we get them to make sure that they are complete. Communication back and forth with the lender. It also depends, right? Is the buyer's attorney the same person as the bank attorney? Are they dual representing the buyer and the bank? In New York, that's generally allowed. So it is more work for the buyer's attorney if they're also dual representing. So you can calculate that time into it. But yeah, it definitely varies. Some attorneys will charge a fee based on the amount of the total savings, based on the total amount of work done. Many attorneys just have a flat fee to go for it. There's different fee structures that I've seen different attorneys do in different, firms that I've worked at, different ways to charge it. There is a transfer tax credit. That's right. You're jumping the gun. Yes, that's right. There is a transfer tax credit as well to seller. Although you're putting to seller and then mortgage tax savings to buyer, but it's all negotiable. So in this scenario I have up here, I negotiated buyer to get the full benefit. She got the benefit of the transfer tax credit too, right? We had seller credit buyer with that money that they were saving at closing. And so buyer got that savings as well. Okay, so let's do some real world money. Understanding that most of our clients are not buying $4 million condos. So here we have a much more modest, $1 million condo purchase. The old studios as they sell here. No, you can get more than a studio for $1 million. But here, yeah, let's just take an example where we have a $1 million condo purchase and seller currently has $500,000 remaining currently on their principal, on their mortgage. We know they do because first I went online on Acris, right? And I saw they had a loan. And now I've asked the seller's attorney for a copy of a recent loan statement, right? Give me your October loan statement so I can see how much they owe now, because that's what matters. Our buyer is going to finance $800,000. If we did not have a CEMA at all, we're looking at a $15,400 mortgage tax. And we know that because that's 1.925% of the loan amount. That is a flat fee paid at time of closing. It's collected by the title company and paid over to the taxing authorities at closing. That's a mixture of New York City and New York State a mortgage tax due. Now here, the New York State transfer tax savings, that's, sellers have to pay 0.4% of purchase price as a New York State transfer tax due at closing, just a one-time payment. With a CEMA, buyer would pay $5,400 as mortgage tax, and seller paid $2,000 in transfer tax. So in both scenarios, there's money to be saved here, right? We found $10,000 for the buyer and $2,000 for the seller. And I use that word. That's why I phrase it, that we found this money. It is like we were walking along the ground and just found $10,000 and handed it to a buyer that they likely never even knew that they could save. We'll pause here for a question. Do you, as seller's attorney, normally request a portion of the same be split between the parties? If so, what split do you request? I do. Again, as long as if it was negotiated as part of the deal sheet, then I will, we respect the business terms that's been part of the offer, but that's very rarely the case. If I am seller's attorney and the buyers are asking for a CEMA, I ask for half of it. And a reasonable buyer's attorney will give it because they'll understand that this is just a newfound negotiation and most people will give it. If I am a seller and the buyer did not ask for a CEMA, I'm going to ask for the full CEMA. On my first round, my initial rider is going to ask for full CEMA and transfer tax savings. And a reasonable buyer's attorney will then ask for half, right? You get how it's going, right? Either way, whether I ask for it or not, the first ask is always all, and then we very reasonably will settle on half. And I'll tell my clients, hey, that's fair. This is fair that you guys should split it. But I just showed you an example of 4 million plus where they did not ask to split it. Okay, so Joseph asked, I might have missed this, but does the buyer get to assume the rate had on their loan balance if they have good credit? I wish. Unfortunately not. Brand new rate. And I think even the way, if you read up on CEMAs, they'll say the old loan is applied, but subject to the new buyer's loan commitment, right? The new lender's loan commitment. We're not honoring the interest rates because that'd be a loan assumption, which is different. So unfortunately not. We are going with the new interest rates. So how to calculate the CEMA? I'll show you in the next slide. What about the $2,000 savings to seller? Do you claim the savings for buyer as well? It depends how we've negotiated the deal. In this right now, what I'm showing on the screen, it's just we did a CEMA, and buyer gets to keep their savings, seller keeps their savings. It's a very basic, just like on its face type of savings. I do not see any of the questions. Did they hide it? Well, I think if people are just asking the chat box. Or is there also a Q&A? Let's see. Oh, there's a Q&A. Oh, wow, there's a lot of questions. Okay, maybe we do leave these to the end. If seller's mortgage is not satisfied, only assigned, what liability does the seller continue to have? Great question. So this transfer tax that the transfer tax savings that they're doing is basically they're getting it because it's called a continuing lien deduction. Seller does not get, their loan does not get considered satisfied. It is a continuing lien. Their loan does get paid off, and that's a big reason the title company's there, right? They take the loan payoff, they're paying off the loan and insuring, right? Providing a title insurance to the buyer, providing insurance to the buyer's lender. And part of what they are is ensuring that loan gets paid off. Any title company will either require a proof of wire, they'll even call up the bank at the table to make sure they got the wire, or they're taking bank checks. I think I'm going to pause on these questions just for a little bit because there's a bunch coming through on the Q&A, just because I think some of these questions are going to be answered in a few of our upcoming slides. And then if not, I'll leave time at the end and we can chat about more. Okay, so here's some math and mechanics. My quotation mark went the opposite way. So here in the scenarios we just went through, purchasers will only pay mortgage tax on the new money, right? The new money is the untaxed money. We call it the new money. So here, borrower, or purchaser has an $800,000 loan. The seller has $500,000 remaining principal. So we have $300,000 of new money. Okay? So if we go back on the last slide, here, that's the math here. So basically, they're only paying money on the 300,000 difference between the 500 and the 8,000, which, everyone, if everyone takes out their phone calculator, you can crunch it, right? So you talk about you would do 1.925% of $800,000. That would be the no CEMA money. And then you would do 1.8% of $300,000, which is the new money. And the reason why the tax rate, it's 1.8%, is because the new money, we've actually just lowered the tax rate in that scenario, right? Because it's now the new money loan is under $500,000. So not only can we do the CEMA, we're also lowering their tax rate, which everyone's going to be happy about. So that's kind of the math on that. The higher the remaining principal and loan amount, the higher the savings. That's why I showed you that $4 million one. One, because I just did it, and two, because you can kind of see the powerful of it. I've done CEMAs where we've saved over $80,000. So big money potentially on the table. Also, I will say, like, if you are doing real estate law, you should always have like a good title company in your back pocket. Judicial is wonderful. I've worked with them for years. And you can reach out to them and say, hey, can you help me crunch these numbers on a CEMA? And they'll tell you, right? They're there to help you. They'll send you a title bill. And you could say, like, send me a title bill if there was no CEMA, and then with a CEMA, they'll ask what information you need. And you can kind of get different numbers on it, right? To help you with your cost benefit analysis. Okay. Now, also, we have the continuing lien deduction here that seller's getting in our scenario. Okay, so here we had a $1 million purchase price, and they're signing over their $500,000 remaining principal. So the state recognizes this. So they allow sellers to do a continuing lien deduction. And this is done at closing. There are these ACRA docs we have to prepare, these transfer tax documents. And on that, we'll note the continuing lien. And we'll include the exact number, right? No, this is all has to be very exact on the forms. We'll include the exact number, and they'll ask for oops, I did it again. I'm never going to be asked to do one of these again just because for some reason, I keep Xing out the Zoom box, the Zoom square away. Sorry about that. So you'll put down the $500,000 continuing lien deduction. And basically what that does is now the state will take the tax rate based on the difference. When here the difference is also it's 500,000, it's half of it. So you can do the math on that, right? We can do that live. Instead of 0.4% of $1 million, it's going to be 0.4% of $500,000. So instead of it's literally going to be half of it. Yes, it goes from $4,000 to $2,000. Obviously, the savings on the continuing lien are much lower, right? When we're talking 0.4% of a purchase price versus 0.925% of the loan amount, right? The savings are smaller. But I mean, again, you're going through the process, like who's going to say no to $2,000? I think most would, unless you're desperate to close like immediately. But even still, if you're financing, there's time involved anyway. Okay. So people have been asking about this. So, I know I might sound redundant, but there are different ways to do this. Again, so I think the most common thing that people think is the purchasers retain the full benefit and they pay all costs associated with the CEMA. And then the contract will simply state, purchasers shall receive full benefit of purchase CEMA. It'll be a lot more lawyerly than that, right? Basically, because first we need seller to agree to it. If seller will not agree to a CEMA, you cannot do it. They have to sign the documents. There's no way around it. Short of fraud, you need the seller to agree to do it. And it's so like there's humans involved, right? And sometimes sellers don't quite understand. Sometimes I can't tell you, I've worked with attorneys who will not do CEMAs because they don't understand it. They've never done one before. People who don't want to educate themselves on how to do one may just say, I'm not doing it. I don't want the hassle involved in it. If that's the case, your client should be finding a new attorney. I think lack of self-education on how to do something like this should not be a reason to avoid it. But I digress. But yes, so first you need seller to agree to it. So the language will have to say seller shall agree, agrees to cooperate with purchaser's request for a purchase CEMA. And we'll kind of go through the mechanics of how to actually do one, right? And that purchaser shall be responsible for all costs and shall receive full benefit of the CEMA. Second scenario, less likely is seller retains full benefit, right? And they'll pay all costs, right? So now instead of the buyer getting the big mortgage tax savings, seller will. And some sellers think that's fair. They say, well, I've already paid the mortgage tax. Why shouldn't I get the they can only get a CEMA because of my mortgage. True, but you can only get a CEMA because of the buyer's new mortgage as well. So, I mean, the argument's a bit flawed. It can go at, both sides. That's why, honestly, splitting is normally the best way. In this scenario, because let's say the seller keeps the full benefit, because buyer will owe a reduced mortgage tax, when we're calculating the closing adjustments with the other side's attorney, we'll calculate exactly what the savings are, and then we'll have to credit seller with that amount. It becomes like we should add it to the purchase price. And instead of buyer paying the New York for their mortgage tax or this difference of it, they'll have to pay it over to seller instead. Most commonly, as you've heard me say, is we're going to split, right? They're going to split the full benefit and cost. In this case, at closing, purchaser will give a closing credit to the seller for 50% of mortgage tax savings. And seller will give one to purchaser for 50% of New York State transfer tax savings, and then we split costs 50-50. Now, when I say split costs 50-50, it's really just the payoff bank attorney fees for it. If either side's attorney is charging their own legal fees for it, that'll be paid by the parties individually. Yes, that would be fine. You can do it that way. Okay. I'll pause and take a question or two. Can you give us an outline and samples of the additional docs that are needed to be prepared for a CEMA? Not so simple. You have to reach out to. We'll go like the schematics how to do one, and maybe that's helpful. But by the way, my contact information will be at the end of this, and I'm happy to chat at any point. Isn't it essentially malpractice? Wait, I lost question. Isn't it essentially malpractice to not do a purchase scheme if it results in savings and won't cause unnecessary delay? It's not. I mean, you can do some case law on this and get back to me, but it's not, and many lawyers don't do it at all. I own a house and going to buy another that will be my primary residence in Nassau County. By the way, my current residence in Queens. Can I be benefited by a CEMA, and if so, how? The one I'm buying is more than 2.5 million. So you could only do a CEMA if you're paying off debt. So you can't do in this scenario, what you're describing is not how a CEMA would work. It's not because you own a house with a mortgage. If you take out another house with a mortgage, that you can do a CEMA. It depends on the house you're buying. Does the current seller have debt on the house, right? A mortgage debt. If so, you can possibly benefit from a CEMA. You want to go online to see if they have a loan. You want to reach out to the seller's attorney to see how much they owe on that loan, right? You also have to make sure that you have a bank that allows CEMAs. Both your bank and the seller's bank have to allow CEMAs. There are some banks that won't. So off the bat, I would say, actually, I probably should have said this from the beginning. Never, ever, 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 ever promise your clients that you can do a CEMA. Never. Does it happen most of the time? Sure. Yeah, most times we apply for a CEMA, we're able to get one. But there's definitely scenarios where it does not work. Like, for example, if the payoff bank has lost the note, can't do a CEMA. There are just some banks on their face that won't allow it. In fact, I've had a client who's about to sign a new development sponsor contract, right? They're buying a new construction, and it was going to force the buyer to do a CEMA for the sponsor's benefit. And the language said, buyer shall cause their lender to do a CEMA. But buyer's own bank doesn't do CEMAs. They didn't allow it. I think at the time, I think they were borrowing with Goldman Sachs, and they didn't allow CEMAs. So if my client would have signed that contract as it stood, he could have ended up in default, and his down payment would have been on the line. We amended the language before he signed it, but I saw that and I was just thinking, like, how it's so easy to miss such a little line like that. Now, obviously, us as lawyers, we go in and we read the dense language. But that's a scenario where a buyer could have found themselves in trouble by agreeing to say, we will do one. The best you can ever say is we'll exercise reasonable, maybe best efforts. We'll try our best. That's really all you can do for a CEMA. Okay. When to mention it? As early as possible. Like I said, I mention it during my pitch calls when clients are calling me and they're speaking to other attorneys. If I hear they're buying a condo and they're financing, right on the phone with them even. I'll go right on Acris and I'll check. Oh, I see the seller has a mortgage that they just took out in 2020. Has anyone spoken to you about a CEMA? And most times I get a what? What's that? And then I do a very smaller version of this call, right? Of the Zoom. I just explain kind of what it is and kind of what dollars we're talking, and if I'm happy to kind of talk with them about it, see if we can do it. It's a huge value add. I mean, just off the bat. I mean, if there's one way you can show immediate value to your client, it's by talking about a CEMA. For real estate brokers too, if you're practicing real estate law and you are trying to get more brokers to refer you business or to work with you, teaching them about it, right? Or even pitching it, telling them how they can help their business, right? Imagine if brokers brought this up more often. It could be like a great negotiating tool in terms of, if you're like $10,000, $20,000 away in a offer negotiation, right? And you could just find the money on the table through a CEMA. Also to lenders, sometimes lenders aren't even bringing it up to their clients, which is really crazy to me, but also value add for them as well. You identify the viability during due diligence, and then you got to add it to the contract. There's no requirement for anyone to participate if you don't add it to the contract. Okay, is it worth it? This is kind of a really basic question. Is it worth it? You have to do a cost-benefit analysis on doing it. The first thing you could know even before doing it is how much is your client borrowing, right? If you have a small loan, right? If they're only borrowing $200,000, you have a 1.8% mortgage tax, 0.018. You only have a $3,600 mortgage tax already as it. Is it worth it to do it? Um, let's say they're borrowing 200,000, the seller has $100,000 remaining principal. That means now you're looking at $100,000 new money, right? So if you can save the mortgage tax on $100,000, that's what, $1,800? It really may not be worth it to even go for it. And the reasoning is because there are costs involved. Your own lawyer legal fees they'll likely charge a fee. Like I said, there's a lot of different structures. It really depends on the lawyer you're working with, their level of sophistication, right? You're working with a lawyer at, blank Rome, you're going to have different prices than if you're working at a different shop. It's just going to depend their level of sophistication of what they're charging, what they're doing, the type of lawyer you're working with. Also, their just experience in doing CEMAs in general. Are they representing the bank as well? Right? Can they streamline it that way, or are they separate and they cannot? If it's a separate bank attorney, oftentimes their bank attorney will also charge a fee. They have to do more work as well. They have to review the documents. They have to coordinate with the payoff bank. The assigning lender, right? When I'm saying assigning lender, that's also the payoff bank. CEMA recording fees. That the CEMA document, it has several exhibits, and one of it is a mortgage, right? And the note, like it's a much bigger recorded document, and that all has to be recorded now. So you have more title fees, right? You have more recording fees for that. Timing is really important. There was a stretch where, I think, during, COVID shutdown where CEMAs were taking over 12 weeks to do. That's a long time, especially in the real estate world. I think we got to a point where some banks were saying 16 weeks, the worst of it. You know, Honestly, in my experience, CEMAs are not delaying the transaction. Maybe a little bit, but most maybe by a week or so, but usually not. If you have a good, diligent attorney who's ordering it immediately, it really shouldn't delay. For example, it's part of my regular practice that as soon as the day we enter contract, I already have the assignment forms that I need, and I am ordering it from the payoff bank, right? I am immediately sending it out that same day because timing is important. You want to make sure you're not delaying it, especially if you have a deal where the seller is not keeping any benefit, right? If you have a deal where the buyer's keeping the full benefit, the seller's probably not going to be too interested in this being delayed at all. Okay, so some steps. One, obtain seller's loan statement. Two, do the cost benefit analysis. If it's worth it, if it's worth the cost, worth the time, based on seller's loan principal and purchaser's loan amount. Three, you're going to contact seller's payoff lender. So let's say seller has a loan with Wells Fargo. Each bank has their own separate payoff attorney. You can't just contact Wells. You need to know who their attorney is. That can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. I have my own master list of which payoff attorneys do which banks. Sometimes they're changing. Sometimes it's obscure banks. Sometimes they're being serviced. So that for sure can be a pain. But it's the only way about it. You have to reach out to that bank attorney and the payoff attorney, and you have to ask them for their assignment forms because they'll each have different ones. You'll get those assignment forms and you'll have to send to the seller to sign. Keep in mind it's always the buyer's attorney. It's usually their obligation to do this, not the seller. So the buyer is reaching out to the seller's bank attorney, getting the forms. And then I email it over to the seller's attorney and say, hey, here are the forms. They need to be signed by your client. And usually they will require a fee up front, sometimes a bank check. It can vary. I've seen it anywhere from 500 to 1,500 up front. And then oftentimes a fee due at closing just to the payoff bank. That's kind of on the higher end though. Sometimes it's like $500 and $800 for the payoff bank. And they will actually have to come to the closing. Once the assignment docs are in, right, you've ordered it. Now we're waiting. Right now it's like it's a waiting game, and it could just take a few weeks or longer depending on the bank and where the docs are located, if they had trouble locating anything. Once it's in, now it's going to be reviewed by the new bank's attorney and maybe even the buyers and sellers attorneys as well. They have to review the documents. Again, we want to make sure the note's intact, the allonges are there. It's they have to be technically correct in order for a CEMA to work. Okay. Once they're approved, you have to tell the title company they need to be involved. Title also usually will need to review the docs, and also they're kind of the gatekeeper on how much mortgage tax is being collected. So they need to know exactly what the old money, new money is. They have their own affidavit, will be signed at closing. And again, just really important to do this all right away. So that's it for my formal slide. There's my mug. But here's my contact information.
I'm just going to pop in for the course code. The course code today is PRIMP, PRIMP. I will type it in the chat. The course code is PRIMP.
And if for everyone on this call saying, well, that's a really weird course code, it's because Diana made the mistake of asking me to choose it. And so I chose yesterday's Wordle word. If you guys are all Wordlers, PRIMP was yesterday's Wordle. I once made the mistake and gave same day Wordle, so didn't do that today, guys.
So we have a bunch of questions. Do you want to look through them? Do you want me to maybe read some? I was kind of going through them and dismissing them once they were answered. But
I can kind of just go through. Since we don't have, I don't think there's gonna be enough time to do all of them. I could just pick some and
yeah, sure. You see in the Q&A it says open 15. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, I have it. Perfect. A list of lenders who are known as CEMA friendly. I don't know that I have a certain list who I know as CEMA friendly. I mean, I definitely know that there's some that are not. I'm happy to chat with you about that offline. I don't know that I want to be recorded saying which banks are CEMA friendly, but yes, the big banks like Wells, Citi, Citizens. These are banks that do CEMAs all day long. Hey, fellow wordler. Yeah, I have a big friend group that we just kind of, not a big friend group, but I have friends that we just shoot the Wordle scores every day. So it made me think of it with the word. Can it be done with purchase of an apartment building as part of a 1031 exchange? I definitely chat with with your bank on specifics on that, especially with your 1031. Remember, 1031s have very, very tight timelines as well, so you want to be very careful there. Is the seller still liable for the amount consolidated if buyer defaults on the loan? Nope. Seller's loan is being paid off at closing, and buyer will be signing a brand new note, right? They're not assuming seller's loan, so the seller will not be on the hook for that. Does the seller remain obligated on original mortgage amount? Nope, it's paid off at closing. It's paid off at closing. When reviewing assignment docs, we often see missing allonges or missing copies of docs. Recording docs we have a title company obtained for us, but how do you deal with missing allonges and notes? If you have a missing allonge and note, the CEMA is not viable. I've never heard of a CEMA being successful if a note's been lost. And that can really suck because you also don't find that out till closer on to the end of the process. Maybe as you've been waiting, they find out then you're missing a note, and then they can't do the CEMA at all. Is the new lender paying off the seller's loan? Typically, I mean, it doesn't have to be. Let's say Nathan, you owe me $1 million and my loan is for 800,000. I basically tell you how I want you to pay the purchase price, right? I want you to pay my $800,000 loan, and I want you to make $200,000 payable to me. Most likely, you're using your loan proceeds from your new loan to pay off my loan, but not necessarily where the money comes from. Lauren says she just did a CEMA yesterday with a lost note certificate. I haven't seen that. Which, if you don't mind popping in, which banks you did that with? It's good to know, because then I think that might go to the CEMA friendly notes. All right, let me take this. Okay. What else do we have? Do you find that many non-New York payoff banks will refuse to cooperate with a purchase CEMA? What are the additional bank attorney fees for a CEMA? That's a really, really great question, and the answer is yes. I am a firm believer that a New York transaction should be using New York lenders for a variety of reasons. This is one of them. I have had clients go with Canadian banks, because they hold a lot of their assets, or they're giving you a better rate. There are just some banks who won't do it. And as you leave New York, CEMAs are just not commonly done, and many banks won't know about them at all. So yeah, absolutely, I've seen that be done. Not only using a New York bank, but even like a hyper local New York loan officer, right? I've definitely had clients who are using loan officers from other states who are just not familiar with the word CEMA, not really, and it gets kind of caught up in their own pipeline at the bank where they're just not really quite sure what to do with it. And usually we can sort it out and find a way, but we're generally losing time. CEMA lender costs, that's going to be lender specific. Does it depend on the amount of the loan? Typically not. I think more likely different attorneys are basing fees on the amount of, savings or the loan, but the actual bank themselves, no. JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America do grant CEMAs. Um, they can take, I think sometimes I think Bank of America may take a little bit longer than other banks typically, but yeah, they do also do CEMAs. Um, does CEMA help on sellers' New York City transfer tax? In a very, very, very limited scenarios, it can. Personally, that's something that there is liability that gets to be taken on. Basically, it has to have similar. There's like a worksheet you can do to see if it can affect your New York City transfer tax. It has to do with how long ago the loan was taken out, the differences in like interest rates. But I would say most times you are not going to save on the New York City transfer tax in most scenarios. But like I said, there's been a few. Then you're really in the title company involved as well to help review and make sure that they are meeting the standards for it. I understand they need to apply quickly and upfront fee may need by the payoff bank. That's true. If the deal is contingent upon finance, the buyer does not get financing. Do you warn the buyer the upfront fee is not refundable? Are there any seller upfront costs? Do you usually split the upfront costs at closing? Great question, George. The payoff attorney fee, where when you first order it, they require a fee up front. Usually that's going to be the only fee that's paid upfront out of pocket. Most other fees are due at closing and only if the CEMA is successful. But the payoff attorney, they're not going to get roped into the typical only pay at closing type of structure. What they want is going to be what they want is to get paid up front. So they won't even start the process till they get paid. Again, it depends what the contract says, but many times the buyer does front this fee and then it's split at time of closing. So whether or not the CEMA is successful or not, that fee is generally not refundable. This is different than, other fees that aren't due. The seller upfront cost, the same thing, the payoff attorney, right? It just really depends on how the buyer and seller have structured that fee. Do you usually split the upfront costs at closing? Mm-hmm. Yep. If it's a situation where each party um, is agreeing to cover agree to split the costs, then generally, yeah, that's something that is split at closing, all the upfront costs as well. Usually the only fee that is not split are going to be their own specific lawyer fees. PRIMP, P-R-I-M-P, is the CLE code. If you didn't hear, it was yesterday's Wordle. So if you forgot it, you can check it that way. But yes, it is the CLE code for today. You're welcome. Thank you for this program. I never knew it could be used by buyers. That's great. I'm glad you got something helpful out of it. That is fair. That's what I asked as seller, 50%. He's asked, I would want for a buyer to give my client 50% of the savings. Is that a fair number? Yes, that is a fair number. Do you ask for more time in the mortgage commitment contingencies for purchase CEMA as a buyer? Not really, because the CEMA doesn't really affect how long it takes for you to get a commitment letter. And I will say most times the deal is not contingent on the success of a CEMA. Well, Michelle, I'm so sorry about yesterday's word. Most times it is not contingent on getting a CEMA. So you have to it's something that all parties will try to do, but either you get it or you don't. Usually the buyer's not gonna write to cancel. So no, I don't usually get more time. We usually get like a 30 or 45-day contingency period, um, regardless of whether or not there is a CEMA. Um, well, people are saying they're accepting affidavit of lost notes. In my experience, I have really seen most banks not allow that. But if this is the case, excellent. Maybe it's more lender dependent. Are condo sponsors permit or require refund of purchase CEMAs? So that's honestly a whole nother scenario where there's new developments where sometimes there's CEMAs, sometimes we do a different scenario where buyers will just sign an affidavit and pay it over as part of their construction loan, but we are out of time. So
Yes, thank you so much for a wonderful CLE. Everyone was super engaged. I think you were definitely probably top 5 questions we've ever had, and we've done quite a few of these. So thank you so much. Everyone really enjoyed it. Lots of questions. Whenever I see a lot of questions, I know everyone was engaged. So we look forward to seeing you next time. We'll have another CLE in December, and we'll, draft that invitation shortly. And Allison, again, thank you for a wonderful lecture.
thank you. Bye.